Hello, creative people, and welcome back to the Makerspace. You ain't gonna believe what I got for you today. Really, this is gonna be cool. I'm gonna teach you how to use CorelDRAW to do something like this. This is an F-18 Hornet illustration I just did for a t-shirt design. And using the tips and tricks that I'm gonna share with you today, you can use those same tricks to do any kind of illustration that you'd like, whether it be a portrait of a family member, a friend, your favorite pet, your first car, whatever, it doesn't matter. You can draw it, and you can do it photorealistically in CorelDRAW. So if you're interested in trying something like this for yourself, follow along. This is going to be a fun project. I think you're really going to enjoy it. So as I stated in my intro, this is the illustration that we're going to work on. And it may look pretty daunting to you at first, but it's actually quite simple once you understand the basic principles of how this is constructed. So let me show you some of the basics first before we dive into something like this. Don't worry, hang in there with me. You're going to do just fine, I promise. So the first thing I want to show you is basically how this whole thing will go together. And think of it as sort of like a jigsaw puzzle. That's the best way to describe it. And what we do is we use this tool over here called the freehand tool. And the freehand tool, if you click and hold down, you have the option of using the freehand tool here, which is F5 on your keyboard, or you can use the 3-point curve tool, and that you need to click on in order to activate that. But those are the two tools that I use mostly. I don't so much bother myself with these other features right here. It's usually freehand and 3-point curve, and I'll show you why in just a second here. But let's just start off with the freehand tool, since that's the easiest one to use. And it's basically what it says. It's just a freehand tool that allows you to click, 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 and it draws line segments wherever you click and then click again. See, those are just straight line segments. I've drawn 4 individual line segments. But here's the main thing we need to understand when we're going to do something like one of these photorealistic illustrations. We're going to use closed cells. And what that is simply where you draw a series of line segments, or in the case of the 3-point curve tool, a set of 3-point curves. Let's do that real quick. I'll show you that. You do a 3-point curve by clicking and holding down the mouse button. You drag it to another destination point. You let go, and now you can drag up or down or left or right, and see how you make this curve kind of follow wherever the mouse goes, and then wherever you click again on the screen is where it will place the end of that curve, like so. And if you wanted to draw another one, you would just simply click on the node or the end point of that last 3-point line segment that you drew, click, hold down, go to another point on the screen, let go, and now drag any way you want, and then click again. And now you've got another 3-point line segment. If I go back and activate the freehand tool, it's the same thing. If I click once on the screen, click again on the screen, I get another line segment. If I wanted to do multiple straight line segments, I would click, and then instead of just single clicking, I would double click. And now that tells CorelDRAW that you're going to continue the line segment. So double click, double click, double click, double click, and now I'm going to single click on that last node or the beginning of that first line segment that I started with. So click. Now here's an interesting thing I want to show you. I'm going to go up here to the pick tool, and all I do is just click one time on the screen. It just kind of deactivates all of those nodes that are there. If I click and hold down and drag this shape around, you'll notice something. It's actually a closed cell. And if you've used any other graphics programs before, like remember Microsoft Paint, you could draw these little cells, and then you could go and drag and drop a color into that cell and fill it with a color. Well, we can do the same thing here by just going here to our fill tool, and we can say uniform fill. This is just a for instance, there's many options, and just pick a color. Let's say pick a red, or you know what, let's slide this thing up and down, and you can see how you can scroll through the different colors. Let's go with the green, and we'll drag this over here, and we'll say okay. See how it just filled in that cell? Now we can only fill in a cell with a color if the cell is closed. Now let me show you something. If the cell is open, and let's say I did a line segment and I went click, double click, single click. And then let's say I hit escape just to stop that process. And then I said, oh, wait a minute, I want to close that cell. And I went here to this node. See how it snaps to the node? And I click and I double click and then single click on the beginning point of that first line segment here. I can't go and fill it now. If I go to fill, uniform fill, pick a color and say okay, it doesn't fill it. And that's because it's not closed. If you notice, it's 2 line segments. Because when I continued on and I said, oh, I need to close that cell and drew these 2 shapes right here, it wasn't part of this line segment. It didn't see it as a part of that line segment. It saw it as a separate set of segments. Say that 5 times fast. A separate set of segments. So anyway, what I'm trying to get at is we need to close this cell if we want to color it. So we have 2 options. We can either delete this and we go and we reactivate these segments and then go back up here to the freehand tool and go click, double click, single click at the beginning. And now we can go uniform fill, pick a color, okay, boom. See that? Or now if I just undo, I'll go back to where we were here. So let's say we were back at this stage here where we had drawn these 3 line segments, but we didn't close it at that time. And then we said, oh, you know what? I need to close that. And then we just went back here to the freehand tool and we said click, double click, single click. Again, these are 2 line segments, but they're not a closed cell. What we can do, instead of having to delete this and then by going back and reactivating the existing line segments, what we can do instead is we can take this line segment of 3 individual line segments and this line segment also of 3 individual line segments. We can window all of these segments and go over here to the join curve command and select apply. And now if we go to uniform fill, pick a color, let's pick a blue. Okay, boom, it's a closed cell. Same thing with this. Remember we did these 2 segments right here. These are the 2 3-point curve segments. We can do the same thing. We can activate those existing segments now, and then we can go up here, hold down our mouse button, go down to 3-point curve, and we could select the node right here. We can do another one, click and drag, select the node, click and drag, boom. And now if we want, we can say uniform fill, pick a different color here. Okay, and there you go. So now that's a closed cell using 3-point curves. So you can have straight line segments or you can have curved segments. But there's one additional thing that's really cool, and I'll show you that real quick because it's just really simple to show you right here on the screen. If we select this shape, this closed cell, with straight line segments, and we activate it by clicking on it, see, so now you have these bounding boxes around, and these bounding boxes allow you to stretch and drag the shape bigger or smaller if you like. If you click on it twice, you can actually rotate the shape around, and by holding down the control key while you do that, it will actually rotate in 15-degree increments, which is super handy. So if you wanted to rotate something 90 degrees, you could easily do that, or any rotational degree. But basically you get the idea. By holding down the control key, you can do that. If I don't hold down the control key at all, then it's just sort of a free-form rotate. Anywhere I drag and drop it is where the shape is going to end up. But here's what I wanted to show you. You've got the straight line segments, but let's say you want to make that kind of nice and curvy, more organic shaped instead of this kind of orthogonal look. Then what you would do is you'd click one time on the shape to activate it. Like again, you get the bounding boxes around that show that that shape is activated. And now what I do is I go up here to our shape tool, you click on this, and you can window everything. So see all the nodes now are highlighted in blue. What we would do then is we would right click, it doesn't have to be on the object, it can be anywhere on the screen. In fact, I'll show you, I'll go way off to the side here, but I'm going to right click and I'm going to click on to curve. So what I'm doing is I'm converting those straight line segments to curves, and now I'm going to right click anywhere on the screen again, and I'm going to go to smooth. And look at that. Now it's a smooth organic shape instead of that orthogonal shape that we had previously. But what's also cool about it is if I use the mouse wheel to scroll in and scroll out, click on the screen somewhere just to deactivate all those, you can see these little nodes right here now. If I click on any of these nodes, these little arrows show up. And these arrows allow you to modify the shape of that curve just by dragging them around. You can drag them in, you can drag them out, you can drag them up, you can drag them down. You can do anything you want with these just by clicking on the node and activating the arrows that will come off to the left and right side of each one of those nodes. You can also delete a node if you don't need it. Let's say you wanted to add a feature here. You can double click anywhere along that line. It adds a node. See, it just placed a node there, and I can add another node, let's say, add another node. Now I can drag the center node. I can do anything with that. I can do anything with this. And then let's say I decide I don't need this node. I can double click on it and it disappears. And now I can go back to this one. I can drag it around. So you get the idea. Very flexible. Same thing with this now. Remember, we drew this shape using those 3-point nodes, 3-point curves. So what you can do with this is you can click on a node to activate it, and while it's activated, it's blue, right click on it and go to smooth. And now it takes out that little bend that we had in it and smooths that out. You can also just window the entire thing, right click and go to smooth. See that? And now all those little dips and bends and things in those curves are gone and they're smooth now. So that's another option. So I'm showing you this because I want to basically illustrate the basic principle behind how we're going to create, like I said, this sort of jigsaw puzzle approach to creating a photorealistic illustration. So let's get started and I'll show you how we proceed from there. But there's a couple steps that we do first. But this is a general understanding of how we're going to create this illustration by using segments, filling them with a color after we've created a closed cell. And they can either be straight orthogonal closed cells or more curvy organic closed cells. Okay? So that's the basic principle behind how we're going to proceed. So in our case, we're going to start off with the image. So I found this image online and it had a high enough resolution where I thought I'd be able to use this really well. And then the first thing I wanted to do was decide how big I'm going to make this design. In my case, I'm going to be using it for a t-shirt design. So I had a rectangle that was 12 inches tall by 13 inches wide. That's the maximum size that I can use for a t-shirt design. So with that 12 by 13 rectangle drawn, then I start looking at the composition. How do I want to lay out the airplane in the illustration? So I think I'm going to rotate it a bit. I had decided on this orientation. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim the illustration to the rectangle. So selecting the illustration, the photo in this case, with the rectangle that I've drawn as an outline, I'm going to go up here to the intersect tool, click on that, and I'm going to delete everything that's outside that box. And what's left is the part of the photograph that I'll be using for my illustration. So that's the first step. And you can see here it's got enough detail where I'm able to zoom in and out and I can see shapes easily that I'll have to replicate using this technique that I'm going to show you next. But before I do that, what I like to do typically is I like to make a copy of this color image in black and white. And so to do that, what you do is, it's very simple. You just make a copy of your color photograph, and then once you have a copy of it, you select one of those copies. It doesn't matter which one. You just want to have one that's color and one that's black and white. And you go up here to Effects, Adjust, and you want to hit Desaturate. That turns that image into a black and white image. And now what you're doing is you're looking at this for contrast. You're going to want to break this image down into all of the different shades that you see here in the image. So you can go up here to Effects, Adjust, you can go to Brightness, Contrast, and Intensity. That's usually a good one. Set these all at 0 so that you're at your default for all of those 3 settings. Because if you've used those commands in the past, they'll be set to whatever they were when you were using it last. So go ahead and just reset these to 0. And then what I like to do is I like to start playing with the contrast. Bring it up and just see what results you get. So you can see here in the nose of the jet, I'm losing a lot of detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the contrast and maybe lower the brightness and raise the intensity. And I'm just kind of playing around with all of these settings just to see what kind of result I get. The object here is to try to get as many different shades of gray as you can, because the more shades you have, kind of the better the transition is between these gradients. And you'll see what that also looks like here in a second. I know I keep saying you're going to see what it looks like in a second, but trust me, you really are. So basically, I just keep playing around with these values until I get something that I'm comfortable with. In this case here, let's see, if I bring the brightness down just a bit, let me bring this contrast down a bit. That's pretty good. I think I can use that. So that's pretty good. So once you have that, you would, actually let me undo that. Once you have that, you would end up with, here's your 12 by 13 boundary. You would have a copy in color and you'd have a copy in black and white. Okay, so now what you want to do is you want to take this black and white image, and this is what we're going to work on. Now what I do, since this has a box around that photograph here, I want to keep those two things together. So I window both of those items and I go up here to Arrange, Group. And now it sees that as one object. See that? Same thing with this. This has a box around it. So what I want to do is I want to window those two items, Arrange, Group. And now it sees that as one item as well. I just want to keep that rectangular box that I've got drawn around my photo attached to the photo. And it just helps for different reasons, but basically I like to just keep things neat and orderly here. You can also use it to line things up like this if I need to line these two illustrations up side by side. It just makes it nice and handy for that. So this is what we're shooting for. And this looks like a lot, and it is, but it's actually quite relaxing. It's really fun to go around and do all these shapes. But what we're doing is we're looking at each one of these shapes like this, for instance, and we're going to start breaking it down into individual components. And one of the tricks for doing that, you can see here how that's done. This is that illustration broken down into all of these little individual shapes. Now remember what I was saying earlier about the closed cells? These are not closed cells yet. These are just the sketches as we go around and break these things down. So like for instance, here's what we would do. We would go into an area like this, for instance, and we would draw around like so. Here we can use that 3-point curve I was telling you about. click from there to there. There we go. And you would go around this object and break it down into individual shapes. So for instance, here where you have the shape like this, I'm just using the line segment, the freehand tool, using the individual line segments, and I'm going around the shape like so. And then what I do is I'll window these line segments. Remember to curve, right click again, smooth. See that? And then just break these things down into shapes. Go back to the freehand tool. Just click around like so. Just double clicking as I go around. Back to the shape tool, window all of these, right click to curve, right click again, smooth. And see, now I was talking earlier about these nodes. Anything that I see here that I want to kind of correct, I can just click on these nodes. I can drag these lines around like so. See that? And just continue around until you have these things all kind of enclosed in cells. Now, one of the tricks that I use is I don't get too concerned initially about making these closed cells, because that can be really difficult if you're just doing it one closed cell at a time. I think that would almost be next to impossible. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll go back here to the freehand tool and just kind of zoom into an area like this, for instance, and I'm looking at this kind of gray shape right here, and you can actually click and hold the mouse key down and just kind of draw with your mouse around this shape like this. See that? I'm going to go around the shape and fully enclose just like that. Now I'm still holding down the mouse key. I haven't let off the mouse key yet. And what I'll do is I'll kind of go beyond, like into the next shape, and then let go. Okay, and then what I do is I go up here to the crop tool. If you click and drag down to this virtual segment delete tool, now anything that this little X-Acto blade knife crosses over when you window, you click and drag a window, it trims to that line. See how I did that? So then what I would do is I'd go back here to the freehand tool, zoom out a little bit, start from inside this shape, and I would just go out like this. And for now, let's just kind of finish it off by going in there. I'll go back up here to this trim tool. There we go. So that's how I do that. I just break these things down into shades. Whatever shade I see that looks the same, I just draw an outline around it. So like here, here's another one. And I'm just clicking and holding the mouse key down, and I'm going to drag a shape around it. There we go. Up here, I'm going to click and drag. Up here, click and drag. Oops. You can always undo, that's the nice part. Yep, don't like that. So maybe what I'll do is I'll try this 3-point curve tool. I'll go from here to here. There we go. I'll use this trim tool, trim to that line. I'll go back to this 3-point curve tool. Go there. Drag this arrow. There we go. Go back to the trim tool, trim that line. So you get the idea. You're going to break it down into little shapes and you're going to work your way around, and I'll show you how that looks as we progress here. So let me show you. And this is what we're going after. This is after I've gone into this illustration and I've windowed around all the different tones and values that I see in that illustration. You can see here how I've just gone around and I've trimmed everything, so wherever it ends at another segment, another tone, I've trimmed it. And I've just kind of boxed off these areas as closely as I can so that I've got all of these different shades of gray all surrounded with an outline. And I just went all the way around, you can see here. And I've also decided what I want to keep and what I want to get rid of in the illustration. Like you can see in this case, it was a different Air Force than the United States Air Force with different markings on it. I'm going to make mine a US Navy F-18, so I'm going to have US aircraft markings on my illustration. So I've omitted these markings here because they don't pertain to my particular aircraft that I'm illustrating. Same thing with any other markings that are on the tail, let's say if there was something there, something different. So you go through and you get the whole outline done, broken down into those little individual components. From there now, what you'll do next is you'll make a copy of that and pull it off to the side so that you just have the 12 by 13 border. In this case, like I said, that's the dimension, the max dimension I can have for my t-shirt, and the aircraft outlines that you've just done. So once you have that all established, you're ready to do the next step. And that's kind of where the fun part begins. So once you have that, what I'll do is I'll make an additional copy. So this is a copy of a copy. This is Control C, which is copy. Control V. That will paste a copy of it right on top of itself. While it's still highlighted like it is, you can click and then hold down the Control key and drag it off to the side, and then let go of the mouse key first and then the Control key. And it will make a copy right off to the side like that. So then what I do is I say, okay, I'm going to work in one section at a time just to make my life easier. And this is kind of where the fun part begins. Let's say I want to work on this pylon right here with this drop tank. What I do is I go up to my trim tool right here, this virtual segment delete tool, and I will just delete everything except the portion that I want to work on first. Just like this. Just go ahead and delete it all. That way it's not like too overwhelming. And you can see here what you're left with is just that wing pylon and that drop tank. And that's all we need to get started with. So what I'll do then is I'll just window that, Control C, Control V, that's copy and paste, click, hold down my Control key, and drag that off to the side like so. Okay? Then what I do is I'll use my trim tool again, and I'll start off with one shape of this at a time. And I'll just trim away everything except like this one shape. And you'll kind of get a feel for it here quickly once you start doing this. And I'm showing you really the basic way to start. And once you get going, trust me, you can go really quickly with this. But you can see now I just have that shape, and it may be multiple shapes. Remember before how I showed you how the line segments, they have to be closed in order to shade that in? So you can see these are all individual shapes, right? So if I just undo, 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 I'm back to those shapes that were trimmed while I had it all together. What I'll do then is I'll window everything. I'll go up here to the Join Curves command and hit Apply. And now if I go to the Fill bucket and say Uniform Fill, I can give it a fill color, let's say red, okay? And I know that that was successfully closed and filled with a color. So what I'll do is I'll just take it and drag it in a straight line by holding down the Control key while I move it off to the side. And then I'll do this again. I'll go Control C, copy, Control V, paste, click, hold down the Control key, drag it off to the side, and then zoom in using the mouse wheel. And let's say we want this shape next. I'll go up here to the Virtual Segment Delete tool, and I'll drag and trim around this next shape. See that? There we go. Same thing, window all those shapes, join curves, apply. We'll say uniform fill, and let's give it a different color. Let's say blue, for instance. We'll say okay. And here's where it really gets fun. See these nodes right here? I can take this shape and drag it from that node over onto this shape, and it is going to, like a magnet, it's going to click to its proper node over here. I'll click, drag, and there we go. Those are our first two parts put together. And now I'll do this again. Control C, copy, Control V, paste, drag it over. Now I know that I don't need this shape or this shape, so I can go ahead and just get rid of those. And let's say we do this next one. We'll just go here. We'll get rid of those. We'll get rid of these. See that? And what I do is I kind of get everything that's close by. That way it's easier to go in and just large sweeps and take out everything else quickly. If you just kind of get everything that's close by first, it kind of frees up the space around it to where you can get in there quickly. Remember, we go back in here, we window it, we go to Join Curves, Apply, and then we'll give it a uniform fill. Let's do a different color. So each time we're doing this, we're giving it a different color. And now we can click and drag it over into position, kind of look for a node that's easy to get a hold of, one that would make sense, like you could see this one here, this one here. So we're going to click, drag, let it go until it's like a magnet. Boom. Look at that. I mean, it's really relaxing. It's fun to do. And so you get the idea. You just go Control C to copy, Control V to paste. You move it over and you say, okay, what do I need to delete next? You would delete these shapes next, right? And now you're saying to yourself, my gosh, that'll take forever. Well, no, because what you can do, instead of just deleting all of those things and leaving the one shape that you want behind, what you can do is you can go like this. You can delete things like this, for instance, and start looking at groups of things. So let's say here, here, we'll keep that too. We'll see, we'll keep that. I'll show you here why we did that. Keep that. Let's say keep that, keep that. And just for sake of time expediency here, we'll just still say, okay, we'll just keep that and we'll get rid of all these things, right? Okay, what I do in this case is I go up here to the shape tool and I click on the lines one at a time. See how this line highlighted like that? That means that this line was created by one long line segment that somehow got trimmed, but these two lines are considered part of the same line. You need to break those apart first before you group, let's say, all of these line segments together into their own shape. So while that's highlighted, you go up here to Arrange and you click on Break Curve Apart or Control K. So I just do the Control K trick. Now if I click on that line segment again, it just sees it all by itself, right? So I go back up here to the shape tool and I'll click around these segments just to verify that they're all independent. And then I start on the next shape. Okay, now that is all. So now Control K, Control K. And what I'm doing is I'm just making sure that these segments are individual segments. They kind of stand on their own. Those are good, those are good. How about these? Those are good, those are good. I think we're good with these now. These are all good. I'm just going around one at a time and just selecting them. So those are good. Okay, so knowing that, now if I window all of these and I go to Join Curves, Apply, go to the Fill bucket here, Uniform Fill, find a color. Let's go with yellow. Now that I've joined all these curves, I can go here to the Fill bucket, Uniform Fill. Let's pick a yellow this time. Let's go up here. Okay. And you can see those were all closed cells that we did, but we did a whole group of them this time. And if I click on these individually, you can see that's an individual shape. I'm going to hit undo. That's individual. That's an individual shape. That's an individual. You get the idea, right? But here's the nice part. I can take these now and I can drag these all over to that node. And look at that. So now when I go back to this, I window the whole thing, Control C for copy, Control V for paste, and I pull it over to the side. Now I got a whole different picture here, right? Because I know that I can delete all of these. I can delete this. And now you can see this kind of breaks it down much quicker now. So let's say we could take you know, this shape, for instance. We've got this. Okay, now this is a good example here because here we have an oval that's inside a shape. So what we want to do in this case is, okay, we want to trim that, trim that, trim that. I want to show you this, so I'm going to get rid of all this stuff here. Okay, so now what we've got is an oval inside a shape, but we want to make sure that that is all filled with one color. So what we need to do is we need to window all of that, hit apply, but we need to combine that oval with this shape. So we're going to go up here to arrange and click on combine or Control L. Either one, we're going to combine it. And now we can use the fill tool, uniform fill. Let's go with purple, let's say. We'll give it this color here. Okay. And see that? Now if we didn't combine it, it would fill both of these with this purple color, and those would be considered two separate parts. But you want that to be one part. And so now that you have that, you can drag it into its position next. See that? And that's how you do that. You work your way around, and what I do is I give each one of those shapes a different color. As you do that, you'll see those colors now are going to be down here in this bar. This shows a listing of all the colors that you've used so far in your illustration. So let's go, let's say we want to take this shape here. Let's take this shape here, just so I can show you quickly what I'm talking about. Here we go. All right. Okay. So I'm going to take all of this, apply. Okay, so now what I can do, I say, okay, I'm going to move these two objects over here. So this right here, this oval will go into this oval, And this shape is going to nest right in here into this space right here. I know that I have a yellow and I know that I have a purple color. So let's say we want to window both of these shapes, and let's use a color that's going to really stand out between those two colors. Let's go with this green, right? So now instead of going over here to the paint bucket uniform fill, all we need to do is click on the color down here in this bar, one of the colors that's already available to us. And that's it. That's all we have to do. And now from there, we can just drag this over. And here's the nice part. You can drag it over and you can leave it on top of the other objects. It doesn't matter, because as long as those two objects are still selected, you can click on the node, drag it over to the node here, and let it go. And those things will line up. If you didn't do that and you did it separately, it's not a problem. You could just find one of the nodes that highlights when you click on the object, drag it over, and there should be a corresponding node to the shape on this, and there is. See? Either way. And that works really well. And that's how we would do this. We would work our way around the illustration until these objects are filled in. And I'll show you kind of a progression. When I was working on my illustration, this is basically how I broke it down. I did the outline like I showed you earlier, and then I would copy a section off to the side and break it into individual sections that I could work on, again, so that it wasn't too overwhelming. There's no need to just start doing this whole thing in mass when you can just break it down into these little sub-assemblies, and then you can always drag them into position later on. So what I did was I started out with my outlines. I made them all individual cells like I just showed you. I gave them all a kind of a wonky color. Doesn't really matter what color they are, just they're different so that you can, first you can conclude, yes, they're closed cells, and that when you're done, you should see all of these cells all colored with some color, doesn't matter what, like I said, but they're all filled and colored in, so you know you haven't left out any shapes inadvertently. You've got the whole illustration done. So as I walk through it, I'll show you. I did those tail sections first. I broke those out. I did the tail sections. Next I did this wing, and I did that wing pylon with that drop tank. I did the opposite wing. I kind of worked my way from the outside in. That's usually how I work. It just seems to work better for me that way with that kind of workflow. So after that, I worked on the cockpit section. I got that all done and laid in. From there, I went to the other wing tank and then the body. Once I had that done, the next step is really where the fun begins. And it makes all of this work pay off, because you can see I started adding these shades from the actual photograph back into my illustration that had all of those wonky colors in it, right? You start off by going through it, and you just work your way through until you get to this stage. See that? Now here I've gone in and I've added in the markings that I want. I drew these in myself. I put in the US markings right here and the markings that were on the actual jet that I was illustrating. And I used this as a reference. This was a plastic model that somebody had done. It worked out perfectly because this was the version of the jet that I wanted to illustrate. So I was able to take these markings, trace over them in CorelDRAW. I brought this photograph into Corel. I traced over these markings, and I did like the 411 here. I did the VFA 25. I did the word fist, and I drew these markings out one at a time. So once I had those markings drawn, I was able to bring those in to the illustration that I had done. So remember the 411, the US marking, the word fist, the VFA 25. So I drew those separately and then brought those in and placed them myself. You remember that nice color image that we had saved where we started the whole project initially? Well, now what we do is we can drag that color image over to our shapes that we've got over here. We can drag it right into position, let's say. And let's say here's our wingtip that we've got. Now what we do is we go to the eyedropper tool We select that, and we go to the individual colors in the actual photograph, and we click paste. Go back to the eyedropper tool, we click paste. Go back to the eyedropper tool, we can zoom in a little bit, we click paste. Eyedropper tool. And this is just a lot of fun. It's really relaxing to just go around this whole thing. You can find the color, paste. Go to the next one. Let's say we take this color, paste. And you can see it starting to come to life. This is how it's done. You just go around the whole image. You find the colors that are in those specific cells, and you use the eyedropper tool and go around the whole thing until you've got your illustration done. So, like for instance in here, this shape that goes over the windshield, let's go back in here. I'm just using the mouse wheel to scroll in and out. Go to the eyedropper tool, we'll select that shape, eyedropper tool, select that shape. You get the idea. You just go around the whole illustration. And there you go. That's really it. So if you use that kind of process of going back and forth until all the shapes are done, you will end up creating the illustration like I've got here. Now I've gone around, I've got the whole thing done, and I've grouped it all together so it's one object. Once I had all those shapes individually done, I windowed the whole thing, I went up to Arrange, and I clicked on Group. This one's already grouped together, but here, let me show you. If I go to Arrange and I ungroup all, for instance, you can see that here are all the individual shapes. See that? These were all the shapes that we did. We brought them in one at a time, and then we placed them by using the node, and we ended up with our illustration done in a photorealistic manner. Now we can window the whole thing and go to Arrange and Group. And now the computer sees this as one object. You can see down here it's one object with 1,872 objects. So that's how many of these little closed cells were created to make this illustration. I show you this one because it's kind of a complex example of how you can do a really complicated photorealistic illustration. Obviously, some of the things that you'll draw won't be this complex, so there won't be so many objects in that group. But this is a really good example of what you can do using this very simple technique. And from there, once I knew that I had a 12 by 13 inch background, I looked for different backgrounds that would be suitable to this illustration. I knew that I wanted to have like an aircraft carrier off in the background. So in this case, I was able to find a nice high-res image of a battle group sailing out at sea with the destroyers and the aircraft carriers. So I trimmed that to my 12 by 13 border. I brought that in and I placed it on a layer behind that illustration. So you can see here, that was the illustration that I brought in. Now when you bring something in to an illustration, you can choose what layer to put it on. So this was a separate illustration, and you can see here it's 12 by 13, and I hit P to put it in the center of the page. And if I hold down Control and Home, for instance, it puts it to the top. If I go to Control plus End key, which is right next to the Home key, it places it all the way in the back. So If you can put things in on layers, for instance, my text is on top of everything. It's on the very top, so that was Control Home to place it on the very top. And I brought in my signature, placed it in, and I did this illustration of a hornet. This was all done separately. You get the idea. If I did end, it would put it to the back. Hit home, puts it to the front. See that? So you can stack things on top of each other. You can also move them up and down one layer at a time by holding down Control and either going page down. And let's put it all the way to the end. So now it's behind everything. We can use the page up key while we're holding the Control key down and see it coming up one layer at a time. It's behind the clouds. One more, it's in front of the clouds. See that? Page down puts it behind, page up puts it in front. Down, down, up, up. See that? It's really cool. And so that's how you can composite these illustrations together. So I was able to find an illustration of this hornet. It was a patch that I was able to bring in using the same technique, traced right on top of it, drew the shapes, placed the colors into those closed cells, brought it together as a group of objects. In this case, that's a group of 112 individual objects, this little hornet illustration. Brought it into position. So you would just make these components groups of objects, and then you can bring it together and composite them together one layer at a time by using the home or end key or the page up or page down while you hold the Control key down to layer these things around. But that's basically how you do it in a nutshell. It's a lot of fun to do. You can do all sorts of interesting illustrations. Here, for instance, are some of the other illustrations that I've done. Like I said, I really do enjoyed aviation art. That's my main focus. So these are some of the illustrations that I've currently done. But these were all done the same way. And you can kind of see by the look of them how they're all done into individual cells. See that? All individual cells, closed cells. And it works really well with portraits as well. Now the interesting thing is the individual cells have a black outline to them. But for instance, when they're brought into the t-shirt software, those black lines sort of disappear. You can kind of see here, if I go up here and I go to my outline tool and I say no outline, that's how they'll come out on the t-shirt. So it's really interesting how these designs print out. You can see here the detail, the level of detail. Like look for instance in this fighter pilot's helmet. It is really detailed. I spent a lot of time going into all these little folds, making those individual closed cells, because I was really interested in getting that effect. I wanted the detail to be just off the chain. Crazy, right? But that's the fun. That's the fun part of it. This was one that I did where I illustrated my wife and her dog Dakota. So I have her here as the pilot of the airplane. And there's Dakota. He's going for a ride. And this turned out to be a really fun project. But you get the idea. You can really go crazy with the detail. It's really up to you as how far you want to get into the little tiny details. And the more closed cells that you include, the better the illustration is going to look, in my opinion. It's up to you as to how far you want to take it. But you get the idea. So again, I really appreciate you hanging out with me here at the Makerspace. Hopefully you've gotten inspired to try this out on your own. I would love to see some samples of some of the things that you're working on if you want to give this a try. And if you've got any questions or comments or you run into any problems, drop me a line in the comment section. I'd love to hear from you. So if you'd like to give me a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it. Even better if you subscribe. I've got a lot more projects coming down the pike that I'd love to share with you, and hopefully you'll be here to join me. So take care, and we'll see you again.